everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a reading wrap-up of the last 23 books that I've read since the start of the new year. I decided to do this as kind of like a quarterly wrap-up instead of a monthly wrap-up. I just feel like it makes a lot more sense for the amount of books I've been reading. We're going to go through every book I read chronologically, and I'll also give you my star rating for them. And then we're going to talk about some of my favorite books, my least favorite books, and also some surprises that I had. Before we get into that, I'm going to talk about a couple of the stats I had for my reading. So according to the Storyograph's category system, the most read genre that I've had has been 16 books that were categorized as fantasy, 8 of those were categorized as romance, and only 2 were categorized as LGBT, so I'm definitely slacking on that. I do wish it was 20 out of 20 that were LGBT. I think last year I was reading a lot of the well-known queer YA contemporary books, and this year I've been more so focusing on a lot of the well-known YA fantasy books, which tend to have a straight romance at the center. So if you guys have any queer YA fantasy books to recommend, let a bitch know, because I'd love to read more from that category. The most read authors that I've had so far this year have been Margaret Rogerson and Stephanie Garber, each with 2 books. I definitely think I'm on track to read all of both Margaret Rogerson's and Stephanie Garber's backlist by the end of the year. The most popular book I read was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which I think had around 95k reviews on Storygraph. And the least popular book I read was Forestfall by Lyndall Clipstone, which had, I think, between 100 and 200 reviews on Storygraph. So with those stats out of the way, I'm going to move into talking about each of the books that I read. Starting with the books I read in January, the very first couple of books are ones I read at the very end of December leading into January, so right after the new year. The first one of those was A Restless Truth by Freya Marske. This book ended up giving 3.5 stars, which was a little bit of a disappointment for me. The next book I read was the first volume of Husky and His White Cat Shizun by Meat Bun Who Doesn't Eat Meat, and this book I ended up giving 4 stars. Another book that was kind of like hanging around that I had started in December and then finished in January was A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, and this book I ended up giving 4 stars. And then right after the new year, I wanted to kind of like set my reading goal off right by reading a couple short books. The first one of those was a book I actually received for Christmas, and that is Galatea by Madeline Miller. And this book I ended up giving 4 stars. And then right after that, I read the Deathnote short story collection by Sugumi Oba and Takashi Obata. This so far has been the only manga I've read for this year, and I ended up rating it 4 stars. Then after that, I decided to continue on with reading another volume in the Grandmaster Demonic Cultivation. This is the 3rd volume, and it was also my first 5-star book of the year. I really enjoyed this so much, and I'm so excited to continue the series. Then we have the first audiobook I read this year, and that was The Depths by Nicole Esperance. This was a YA horror book that I was hoping to enjoy, but I ended up only giving it 3 stars. Then I read a book that was a little bit out of my comfort zone. I had gotten it from a recommendation from another YouTuber that I like, and that was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. And this one was also a letdown that I only ended up giving 3 stars. Then I read my first nonfiction book, which is a self-help book called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And this book I gave a 3.5 stars. And then the last book I read in January was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which I really was pleasantly surprised by and ended up giving a 4.5 stars. Now, moving into February, the first book that I ended up reading was the one that I had a lowest rating for the entire year so far, and that was 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I wanted to read this for the Wyverns and Words book club, but it just didn't really work for me, and I ended up giving it a 2.5 stars. The next book I read after that was also a little bit of a dud, and that was Forestfall by Lyndall Clipstone, and this book I ended up rating 3 stars. After those kind of mid books, I did find a couple ones that I really enjoyed. The first one of those being Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This book I ended up giving a 4.5 stars to. And at the same time, I also read the Night Circus for a reading vlog, and this one I also really enjoyed and gave a 4.5 stars to. Next, the book I read after that was Neon Gods by Katie Robert, and I ended up giving that 3 stars. And then we have another book I read in a reading vlog, which was Mysteries of Thorn Manor by Margaret Rogerson, and this I gave 4 stars to. Now moving into the books I read in March, I ended up reading like 4 to 5 books at a time, which I think kind of overall slowed my reading pace for this month. I've also had a really busy month with school and work stuff that's just kind of left my like reading for fun to the wayside. But of the books I did finish this month, the first one was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I give this book 4 stars, and I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than I did Six of Crows. The next book after that was one I was really surprised to enjoy so much, and that was Howl'S Moving Castle by Diane Wynne Jones, and I ended up reading this 5 stars. And the most recent books that I finished are 2 books in a trilogy, and those are the books in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. So I read Once Upon a Broken Heart and gave it 4 stars. And then right after I finished that book, my holds came in for The Ballad of Never After. And I just recently finished that and gave it 4.5 stars. There's also 2 other books that I'm currently reading that I'm not yet done with. The first one of those is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. This is a classic that's in the public domain, so there's just like a free audiobook version of it on YouTube. And I think because it's a book that I can just read whenever and I don't have like a hold on it through the library, I'm not as motivated to finish it. But I will try and finish it in the near future. And the other book that I'm currently in the middle of reading is the second volume of Husky and Whitecat Shizun. In this book, I am a little over halfway through. I think I just got distracted with other books that I wanted to finish instead. But I'm hoping I can finish this sometime in April. So that is a look at all of the books that I have read so far this year. Now let's move into talking about some of my favorite books so far. The first 5-star that I ended up having was the third volume of Grandmaster Demonic Cultivation by MXTX. This book I enjoyed so much and was really fun. I feel like it really just like distilled down everything I love in this series so far and then condensed it all into this one book. My favorite part of this book is actually not the romance. The part of the story that really tugs at my heartstrings is the brotherly friendship relationship between Wei Wuxian and Zhang Chang. I love their relationship so much so that I had to create a new tab for all of their really emotional scenes that happen in this book. But I'm really excited to see where the last book in this series goes, and I'm very happy that this was my first 5-star of the year. The other 5-star I've had so far this year was one that really came out of left field, and that was Howl'S Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I had definitely heard a lot of mixed reviews from booktubers that I like about this book, but I do have to say, as some like background for me, I definitely am not as like in love with a lot of Miyazaki films as much as other people are. So I thought possibly it was just people having a lot of attachment to the movie adaptation, not translating that into their love of the book. Because the book is very different from the movie, and I am of the camp that I think the book is better. I think it has the same flavor of like the fun and whimsy that's in the movie version, but I really just enjoy the characterization of Howl and Sophie much more in the book than in the movie. There's also one part that I don't want to spoil, but an aspect of Howl's background that I thought was so fun and interesting, and was one of the things that really made the book so special for me. I think if you're someone like me who does enjoy the movie but doesn't really consider it like a childhood classic to them, you probably will enjoy the book adaptation more. Or if you do really like the movie, I would definitely give the book a try if you're just wanting to see more of these characters in a different light. The next books that I'm going to be considering some long-term favorites are the Sorcery of Thorns series by Margaret Rogerson. Individually, I gave these books 4 stars, but there's just something really special about the world building and the characterization of the main trio that I love so much, that I could see carrying over into long-term like fandom love for them, if that makes any sense. Like I just said, your love of these books will really ride or die on your feelings towards the main trio of characters. I really love them. I think they're so much fun. And I also really like Margaret Rogerson's writing and the world building that she created in these books. I think overall I really do just enjoy any of the books she's come out with, and I do think she's gotten better with each of her releases. So I'm very excited to see what her next full-length novel looks like. And the next series that I think is going to be one of my long-term faves is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. The first book, when I read it, I only gave a 4 stars. I even said in the Instagram review I did for it that I don't think it's going to be a new fave, but I think upon finishing The Ballad of Never After, the overall story just like clicked for me. I feel like in that one she really was able to nail down exactly the type of slow burn pining that you need for this type of series. And because of that, I'm so excited to see what she does in the third book. And even if there were things in the first book I didn't enjoy with the pacing, I still really liked the characters and the love story that was being told. And just because I love those characters, I'm excited to see how their relationship progresses in the next book. Now we're going to move into talking about some of the disappointments that I had. The first one is one I'm very sad about, and that is Forestfall by Lyndall Clipstone. This is the second book, with the previous one in the duology being Lake's Edge, and that book I ended up rating a 4.5 stars. This one I only rated 3 stars. My overall feelings with this book is that I feel like this book does not have enough substance to stand on its own, and it really should have just been the choice to make Lake's Edge longer. I will admit that the first book does not have great world building, but I think it has enough atmosphere plus good character interactions to make it hold its own. Whereas this one I feel like is more like style over substance. It just felt like a lot of scenes were of the same thing repeating over and over, and there was definitely not enough of a dialogue and explanation to description ratio for me. So yeah, it was really disappointing that I didn't like this book as much as I did the previous one. I do still think that Lyndall Clipstone is a really talented writer, and I have pre-ordered her next book, which I do believe is a standalone, so I think hopefully she'll be able to kind of take what she's learned from writing this first duology and improve her craft for the future. The other disappointment that stood out to me was A Restless Truth by Freya Marsk. This book I ended up giving a 3.5 stars to. So it's not a bad book by any means, but this was like a 5-star prediction for me. I loved the previous book, A Marvelous Light, so much, and I really enjoyed all of the world building aspects in it. And I thought the easiest way for that to be even better and be a 5 stars was for it to be a lesbian couple. But unfortunately, that was definitely the downfall of the book for me. I just didn't really like their relationship, and I thought the sex scenes were honestly kind of gross and weird. And that's probably just personal preference coming in, but yeah, it definitely made me not like this book as much as I'd hoped I would. I do have still very high hopes for the third book in the series, because the main character in that is a character that we've seen in the previous two, and I love him so much. And I think his love interest is also really interesting, so I'm very excited to see how the series rounds out with the last one. Now, let's talk about a couple of these surprises, and these are mostly good surprises that I did not go into thinking I would love them as much as I did. And the first one of those is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This book I ended up giving a 4.5 stars to. I really enjoyed it. I feel like for me, I just have not really bought into the cozy fantasy hype overall. So considering this book is pitched as being a cozy fantasy, I was not really expecting to like it that much. But I just really enjoyed it. I thought the writing style was really interesting, and I liked the structure of it being kind of like an epistolary novel. I really enjoyed her characterization of the Fae. I think it was really unique and suited the, again, like the cozy fantasy vibe really well. I wasn't like obsessed with the romance, but I think it is quite cute, and I'm excited to see how it develops in future books in this series. The next book that was definitely a big surprise for me was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I've always been much more of a character-driven like reader versus like a no plot just vibes type of reader. So I was worried that this book was going to not give me enough of like substance actually to latch onto. But I should have realized that this book is like beloved for a reason and a lot of people's favorite books for a reason. And that's because it is incredibly well written and very beautiful, both in the writing style and also in the content of the book itself. I'm very glad that I ended up reading this, and I'm very excited to read the other book that Erin Morgenstern has out, being The Starless Sea, which I do own and probably will read sometime later this year. And the last book I put as like a surprise fave was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Again, similar to Night Circus, this book is very well loved for a reason. I feel like I wasn't really seeing that reason for the first 25% of the book because I just really disliked the relationship of Jude and Cardan. The book's called The Cruel Prince, like what did you expect? Of course he's going to be a huge asshole. But I don't really like bully romances in theory. I think the second half of the book really worked for me with like the political intrigue side. It just was so dramatic and intense, and Jude is a really good main character to follow. I think she's both a believable teenager, but obviously is also like such a bad bitch that you can't help but want to root for her. And in the end, I do see why her and Cardan work well as a couple, so I'm excited to see how their relationship progresses in the future books in the series. I'm definitely planning on reading The Wicked King very soon. So that is a look at all of the books I've read so far this year. I hope you guys enjoyed this style of reading wrap-up. I'd love to see some of your recent reads, maybe some favorite books you've had so far this year in the comments down below. As always, please consider liking this video or subscribing if you aren't already. Also consider following me on Instagram to see more in-depth book reviews of each of the books I read as I finish them, which is linked in my main channel page. Always consider looking in the description bar and following me on the story graph to see my reading updates in real time. But that's going to be it from me today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!